I was born in Papplewick, Nottinghamshire in 1938 when the war was just starting, and my father was in the Air Force, and so we moved around a bit as he moved in bases, so I didn't actually stay there very long. My first memory of life was holding on to what we called a cot in those days in the garden of our house at Sapperton in Gloucestershire, I think, in England. I was 3 years old, and the house was burning in front of us. The cot contained my brother, and the fireman, I think, and my mother had just been able to get my brother out before the roof fell in on top of him. And they had a terrible time getting the grand piano out of the house, which was the only thing that they really wanted to, my mother really wanted saving. The story is a very touching one, because my father, at that time, it was a Sunday evening, my father was conducting a service at the local church. And the fireman came running in and said, "There's a fire, there's a fire, there's a fire. Excuse me, preacher, do you mind if we pull all the firemen out?" "Yes, go ahead, go ahead." And stop the sermon or stop the service, and all the firemen ran out. Daddy finished the service, and at the end, he got finished up and put everything away and got his robes off and everything and started walking home, and he saw the smoke. And all of a sudden he realized that smoke had to come from this house that was in the middle of the woods, and it was the only house there. So he started to run, and my mother met him halfway, and she said, "Yep, it's us." And he said, "Did they get the grand piano out?" And she said, "Yes," and they did. They took the legs off and put it up over a wall and took it out. But ever since then, for years, when I was a kid, I used to wake up and see flames under the door. I was terrified of fire. I've got over that completely now. But I mean, that's sort of the luck that, a slightly different circumstance that could have taken us both as children. And finally we ended up in the last years of the war in Yorkshire, in the Dales. And that's really where I was, in effect, started out. In very rural, very remote area in what used to be the West Riding of Yorkshire, and is no longer, because they've got rid of the West Riding and merged it. My family growing up was a large, by those days standards, in two ways. Large family. Well, I had two brothers and a sister, finally. And they were all younger than me, so I was the oldest and had to bear the responsibility for all the horrible messes that we used to get into. Living in a rural area like that, much of our life was spent outdoors. We lived in an old country vicarage, and there was no central heating. In fact, there was very little heating in the house. And it was a huge house, more than 20 rooms, back stairs, pantries for servants and all this sort of stuff, which of course we didn't have, couldn't afford. And so living there was a struggle for my mother and my father, not nearly, I wish I'd known more about the struggle. And then two more came in, two cousins really, or friends actually, of my father's and mother's, that were off to India in the Foreign Service, and that had two boys that needed to look after. So then there were 5 boys and 1 girl. Think of the laundry in those days with no machines. Think of the feeding with no refrigerator. Very tough on my mum. Too tough, it turned out. She died very early in her 40s. And then my father married again, and to a wonderful woman who's an artist. Moved to the Cotswolds and had 2 more children, so I've got another brother and sister. And so that makes a total of 6 of us. And I'm still very closely in touch with all of them, fortunately. All of them are doing well. 2 living in France, 1 in Northern Ireland, and with children and grandchildren all over the world.